Today we'll talk about appropriate measurement scales. As you remember, last time we pointed at the importance of using accurate scales that can help us to quantify people's perceptions, preferences, opinions, or agreement. The first example is the rating scale, and if you see, in this case we show some characteristics that we want to assess, and we are going to give the people the option to select between a 5-point rating, where we have number 1 is terrible, 2 bad, 3 regular, 4 good, and 5 outstanding. So what we can see is we have a point in the middle, number 3, which is regular. Then we have a positive assessment, which is good. We have a negative assessment, which is bad. We have a very positive assessment, which is outstanding, and we have a very negative assessment, which is terrible. So this kind of scale is very accurate because it can help you to assess the quality of something in a very precise way. The second example is the frequency scale, and in this case the only difference that you will see is that instead of using a rating we use frequency, and it goes from never to seldom, and then sometimes, and then often, and then always. If you can see, however, it is exactly the same thing. We have number 3 in the middle, which shows like a relatively neutral assessment, and then we have 2 points on the extremes and 2 points in the middle. That is precisely what gives this scale its accuracy. Now the Likert scale is similar, but the only difference is that in this case we're going to express our agreement and disagreement with some statements, and in this case you're going to select strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, and strongly disagree. If you see, we can replace the letters with numbers, and so strongly agree could be number 5, agree could be number 4, undecided would be number 3, disagree would be number 2, and strongly disagree will be number 5. So it gives you exactly the same kind of measurement than a frequency or a rating, except that in this case we use words to express agreement or disagreement, but these words can be translated into numbers and used to quantify an opinion. The next thing that we have is the need-express interaction analysis, and if you remember, in this case the usefulness of this is that it can help you to compare two things, in this case the importance of some skills and contrast to the degree of help that you got in the program to develop these skills. So this is the need-express interaction analysis. Now the importance of these scales is that they can help us to develop some assessment instruments. For example, imagine that we need to assess a speaking presentation in a test, or we want to assess some class presentations, assignments, portfolios. In this case, we need to design scoring rubrics, and the scoring rubrics will have different scales to quantify the characteristics that we want to measure. The same thing goes for class observation formats, for example, and questionnaires for surveys. So the important thing about these scales is that they can help you to assess, to quantify things that are normally qualitative, that you cannot see. That means, in this last example, if you take a portfolio, what is the thing that you're going to assess in the portfolio? We need to have some characteristics. And the second thing is, how are we going to measure the quality of the portfolio? We need a scale. And the scales that I showed you before are good examples of the scales that you can use in order to design assessment instruments. So let's review together the steps that are necessary to create assessment instruments. First of all, we need to describe the characteristics that we need to measure by establishing a theoretical construct. That means that we need to go through the theory and see what exactly it is the thing that we want to measure, that we want to assess. The second step is to adopt the most appropriate scale according to the characteristics that we want to measure and write the items. This could be questions in a questionnaire or statements in a Likert scale, for example. The third step will be to establish the procedures for collecting and interpreting the data. That means that we need to see how we're going to collect the data, how we're going to interpret the results. The fourth step will be to test the assessment instrument by using it just on a few people. That means that the first time that we design an instrument, we're going to use it just to assess 3 or 5 people to see how it works. After that, we can revise it, we can correct the instrument according to the things that we observed, and then we can proceed to piloting our instrument. That means to administer with just one group, to validate the results, and then we can apply our instrument to a large group of people. So the piloting instrument is the last one, and it's very important because from the observations that we collect of the administration of this instrument to one group, we can see if our instrument is valid and accurate to be used in further occasions. So we need to see that we avoid some common measurement problems. First of all, the characteristic. We need to make sure that we measure the things that we want to measure and that we are not measuring other things. In terms of the quantification, we need to see that we use an appropriate scale, right? That we're not missing a scale. And finally, in the rules and procedures, we need to make sure that we don't use different criteria of different interpretation. This is very important because if we have a correct amount of the characteristics, we have validity in our instruments. And if we have an appropriate process of quantification and we follow the rules and procedures, our instrument will also be reliable. These are the two most important elements in an assessment instrument: validity and reliability. Now let's illustrate the process with an example. Imagine that I want to use a class presentation as part of the evaluation criteria for this class with you people. In this case, I need to develop an assessment instrument that helps me to measure in an accurate way your performance in your presentations. And this is going to be a scoring rubric. So this means, ladies and gentlemen, that if I ask you to present in front of the class, I'm going to be observing you and I am going to be assessing specific criteria using an appropriate scale. Let's look at step number 1 then, the general characteristics. First of all, what are the things that I should observe, that I should measure, that I should assess in a class presentation? First of all, as you already mentioned, will be the content. The content is a central part of a class presentation. Another thing will be the materials, because you need to illustrate your presentation using some kind of audio-visual materials that are going to be very important for the success of the presentation. Another important thing will be the non-verbal language or body language, the things that you express that show that you're confident, that you master the content, that you interact with the people by means of looking at them in the eyes or moving around the classroom. All of this verbal and non-verbal language is very important in a presentation. And of course, the verbal language, that you can be fluent, that your speech is clear, that people can understand and hear what you're saying. And finally, we can see that you also manage time appropriately. If the presentation is meant to be 15 minutes, you have to present in 15 minutes, in about 15 minutes. You cannot do 5 minutes, you cannot do 20 or 30 minutes. You have to manage your time, and that's another important part of a presentation. Now, in the same step number 1, we need to specify the characteristics, the general characteristics. For example, if we talk about the materials should be useful. That means that they really make a difference in the presentation. The second thing is that they should be visible to everybody and they should be well organized. And finally, they should be creative and attractive for people. That means that your materials should serve a purpose. So we can see here that a general characteristic, that is materials, can be subdivided into specific aspects that we're going to observe and that we're going to assess using our instrument. So the second step is to select a scale and write the items. In this case, I am going to give you an instrument and you are going to have to select the scale. So go to Classroom, read the instruction for the task, do it, and I will be seeing you next time.